arkadaşlar. Sistemin ücretsiz vermiş olduğu Dagon.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we... So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by... Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the sky. But neither. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, when at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which the region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere word. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position.
Arkadaş kim atmış bunları oraya böyle ya? Ne kadar pis insanlarsınız böyle. Arkadaşlar lütfen denizi kirletmeyin. Çöplerinizi yani. Denizlerinizi kirletmeyin. Bakın işte böyle oluyor sonra.
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, so great was the extent of the new land, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease.
Arkadaşlar şimdi deniz çekilmiş şuraya. Komple çekilmiş.
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
Bence bütün denizin okyanus suyu çekilmiş, okyanus tabanındayız şu anda. Çünkü bütün canlılar şöyle yaşıyor.
That night I encamped, and on the following day still traveled toward the hummock, though that object seemed. By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in too weary to ascend. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastic, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had, and in the glow of the moon I saw. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite picking up my pack. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscence and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent. Whilst urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood gazing, all at an object. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was a close. for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since I perceived whose dazed and the moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out across the chasm. The wavelets washed the base of the site, on whose surface I could now trace both in The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size. I think that these things, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands, glassy, bulging eyes, and other. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scene, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesque, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fish, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed it. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember. I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters upon me in her wildest. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital. brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, it is at night, especially when the moon. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient cessation. So now, often, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat. This I ask myself, but I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons, of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
Beraber arkadaşlar.